The transmission came at 3 in the morning, ship time. Captain Watts was already awake, standing by the observation window with a cold cup of coffee in her hand. She had not slept well in 3 days, not since they had picked up the refugees from the dying world of Seven. The emergency alert pulled her back to the bridge. Lieutenant Park was already at his station, his young face tight with worry. He did not say anything when she entered. He simply put the message on the main screen. The seal of the Galactic Concord filled the display. It was a symbol that every spacefaring species knew and most feared. The Concord had ruled the known galaxy for 12,000 years. They had laws for everything. They had fleets to enforce those laws, and they had very little patience for species that did not obey. Humanity was still new to all of this. They had discovered faster-than-light travel only 60 years ago. In the eyes of the Conquered, humans were children playing in a room full of ancient giants. They had been given probationary status, which meant limited rights and heavy restrictions. It also meant that, when the Conquered gave an order, humanity was expected to obey without question. The message was formal and cold. It came from something called the High Adjudication Office. It informed Captain Watts that her vessel, the colony ship Enduring Hope, was in violation of Concord Statute 7749, Section 12. The violation was the presence of 43 refugees aboard her ship. They had been declared non-compliant by the Concord 100 years ago. They had refused to pay tribute taxes to the central government. For a century, they had lived on the edges of known space, ignored and forgotten. But now the Conquered had decided to make an example of them. All were to be collected and brought to Prime for public judgment. The message gave Captain Watts 6 hours to change course and surrender the refugees to the approaching Conquered fleet. Failure to comply would result in severe consequences for both the Enduring Hope and for humanity as a whole. Park looked at his captain. His hands were shaking slightly over his console. "Ma'am, I am detecting 12 Conquered warships on approach. They will be here in just under 6 hours. Watts said nothing. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned and walked off the bridge. First Officer Cole found her in the corridor outside the cargo bay. Was 10 years younger than, but she had a sharp mind and steady nerves. She was also practical to the point of being cold sometimes. "Captain, we need to talk about this," said. "I know. There are 43 people. We have over 2,000 colonists on this ship, families, children. They are counting on us to get them to New Haven safely." "I know that too." Stepped in front of her captain, blocking the path. "I understand how you feel, but we cannot start a war with the Conquered over refugees we picked up 3 days ago. Earth Command will not support us. The other colonies will not support us. We will be alone." Captain Watts looked at her first officer. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep and heavy tiredness. "Let me talk to them first. Let me understand what we are dealing with." She stepped around and entered the cargo bay. There were small beings, barely 4 feet tall, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They had been given blankets and food, but they still huddled together in tight groups, watching every human who passed with silent fear. They had learned long ago that other species could not be trusted. An elder named came forward to meet the captain. He moved slowly, his thin limbs shaking with age and exhaustion, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Captain Watts, we have heard the transmission. We know what the Conquered wants." "Tell me something," said. "The message says you refuse to pay tribute. Is that true?" "It is true. 100 years ago, the Conquered demanded that we give them 70% of everything we produced, our food, our minerals, our technology. We were a small species on a small world. If we had paid, our children would have starved, so we refused. And they let you go." Made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "They did not care about us. We were too small to matter. They simply cut us off from all trade, all communication, all aid. They expected us to die quietly, and for a long time we almost did. What changed? Other species began to notice us. They saw that it was possible to say no to the conquered and survive. Some of them started asking questions. The conquered does not like questions, so now they have decided that we must be made an example. They will take us to Prime. They will put us on trial, and then they will execute us in front of the whole galaxy so that everyone remembers what happens to those who defy the law. Felt something cold settle in her stomach. All of you, even the children. Especially the children. They want to show that there is no escape, no future for those who resist. Captain Watts looked around the cargo bay. She saw families holding each other. She saw a young mother trying to comfort a crying infant. She saw children no older than her own daughter staring at her with eyes that had already seen too much suffering. She thought about its words, 2,000 colonists, families, her responsibility. She thought about the conquered fleet approaching. 12 warships against one colony ship that had no real weapons. She thought about her daughter Lily, back on Earth, who was studying law because she believed that justice was something worth fighting for. And she thought about all the times in human history when people had turned away refugees because it was easier, because the law said it was acceptable, because someone else's children were not worth the risk. Watts had made many hard decisions in her career. She had sent people into danger. She had made choices that cost lives. But standing in that cargo bay, looking at those frightened faces, she realized that some decisions were not about strategy or survival. Some decisions were about what kind of person you were willing to become. She knelt down in front of. The old watched her with those large dark eyes, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing. "I cannot promise you anything," she said quietly. "I do not know what is going to happen, but I will not hand you over, not today, not ever." Stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out and placed his thin hand over hers. "You may regret this, Captain." Watts stood up and looked at the timer on her wrist display. 5 hours remaining. "Maybe," she said, "but at least I will be able to live with myself." She walked out of the cargo bay and headed back toward the bridge. Whatever came next, she would face it standing up. The conquered fleet arrived 1 hour ahead of schedule. Captain Watts watched the 12 warships emerge from faster-than-light travel and spread out around the enduring hope like wolves surrounding a wounded deer. Each vessel was 3 times the size of her colony ship. Each one carried enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. Park's voice was barely above a whisper. "They are hailing us, Captain." "Put it through." The main screen flickered and a face appeared. It belonged to High Adjudicator of the species. They were tall and thin, with gray skin stretched tight over angular bones. Their eyes were completely black, showing no emotion at all. They were known throughout the galaxy as the perfect enforcers of conquered law. They never questioned orders. They never showed mercy. They simply did what needed to be done. Spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "Captain Watts of the human vessel Enduring Hope, you have received our transmission. You understand the situation. I am here to collect the fugitives and ensure your compliance with galactic law." Kept her voice steady. "High Adjudicator, I respectfully request additional time to consult with my government on Earth. This is a complex situation that requires careful consideration." Tilted his head slightly. It was the only sign of emotion they ever showed, and it usually meant annoyance. "Your request is noted. I will grant you 2 hours to communicate with your authorities. However, I must inform you that the outcome is not in question. The law is clear. They will be surrendered. The only matter to be decided is whether humanity will face additional sanctions for delay." The screen went dark. First Officer Cole let out a long breath. 2 hours, that is something at least. "It is nothing," said Weapons Officer Pete Grant. He was a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a permanent frown. "I have been running combat simulations since they arrived. There is no scenario where we survive a fight with those ships. Not one." "We are not going to fight them," said. "Then what are we going to do?" No one answered. Captain Watts turned to Park. "Open a channel to Earth Command, Priority 1. The reply came back in 20 minutes, which was fast for an interstellar transmission. Admiral Susan Blake appeared on screen. She was an older woman with iron-gray hair and a face that had seen too many hard decisions. She listened to his report without interrupting, then sat in silence for a long moment. She finally said, "You know I cannot authorize you to defy the conquered. Humanity cannot afford a conflict with them. Not now, not over this." "I understand, Admiral. The official position of Earth Command is that you must comply with all lawful conquered demands." Susan Blake paused, and something flickered in her eyes. "Of course, communications in deep space can be unreliable. Messages get delayed. Misunderstandings happen. If you were to take actions based on your own judgment before receiving official orders, well, that would be a matter for review later." Understood. She was on her own, but she was not being ordered to surrender. At least not yet. "Thank you, Admiral." "Good luck, Captain Blake out." The screen went dark again. During the next hour, walked through her ship and listened to her crew. She heard their fears and their arguments. She heard all the reasons why they should just hand over the refugees and get on with their lives. Engineer Danny caught her in the engine room. He was covered in grease, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. "Captain, I have been with you for 15 years. I trust your judgment, but I have a wife and 2 kids in the colonist section. They are counting on me to get them to New Haven. I need to know that you are not going to get us all killed over people we just met." Put her hand on his shoulder. "Danny, I cannot promise you that everything will be fine, but I can promise you that I will not make this decision lightly." In the medical bay, Dr. Maria Santos was treating one of the children. The little one had a fever, probably from the stress and fear. Maria looked up when entered. "I have been talking to them," Maria said softly. "The refugees. Do you know what they call us? They call us the kind ones, because we gave them blankets and food and did not ask for anything in return. They said no other species has ever done that." "What do you think we should do, Maria?" The doctor looked down at the sleeping child. "I think that if we give these people to the conquered, I will never be able to call myself a healer again." Nodded and left without saying anything more. At the end of the hour, she went to her quarters and made a personal call to Earth. Her daughter Lily appeared on screen, surprised and worried. She was 22 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. She was in her 2nd year of law school. "Mom, what is going on? I saw the news feeds. They are saying you picked up some refugees and now the conquered is threatening sanctions." "That is about right." Lily studied her mother's face. "You are thinking about refusing, are you not? You are thinking about keeping them." "I am thinking about it, yes." "Mom, the conquered has been enforcing their laws for 12,000 years. They have crushed species that tried to stand against them. You cannot win this." "I know." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that cut through all of doubts and fears like a blade. "Mom, in my constitutional law class, we study the history of unjust laws. Laws that allowed slavery. Laws that turned away refugees to die. Laws that punished people for being born different. Every single time, there were people who said that the law was the law and nothing could be done. And every single time, the only thing that changed those laws was ordinary people who refused to obey them." Felt tears forming in her eyes. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned from you. If the law says you have to let innocent people die, is it still law? Or is it just power wearing a fancy robe?" The 2 hours expired. Opened communications again. His black eyes showed no patience, no understanding, no hint of doubt. "Captain Watts, the time for consultation has ended. You will now surrender the fugitives and submit to inspection. Your compliance will be noted favorably in our report. Your resistance will be noted as well." Every person on the bridge held their breath. Park's hands hovered over his console. Cole gripped the armrest of her chair. Pete Grant stared at the weapons display that showed nothing but red warnings. Captain Watts stood up slowly. She straightened her uniform. She looked directly into those cold, black eyes on the screen. And then she gave her answer. The bridge of the Enduring Hope was completely silent. Every officer, every technician, every soul on duty held their breath and watched Captain Watts face the screen. High Adjudicator waited with the patience of stone. His black eyes reflected nothing. Behind him, visible through the transparent wall of his command center, 12 warships hung in the darkness of space with their weapons armed and ready. Took a slow breath. She had made her decision in the cargo bay, looking into the eyes of frightened children. She had confirmed it listening to her daughter speak about the difference between law and power. Now she simply had to say the words. "High Adjudicator," she began, "I want to acknowledge some things before I give you my answer." Tilted his head slightly. "Proceed." "Humanity is new to this galaxy. We have only been traveling between stars for 60 years. In that time, we have learned that we are small and weak compared to species like yours. We have signed treaties and accepted restrictions because we had no choice. We needed access to trade routes. We needed technology. We needed to survive. This is known," said. "Your species has been reasonably compliant during your probationary period. That compliance will be considered when determining sanctions for this incident." Continued as if he had not spoken. "I also want to acknowledge that you have the power here. Your ships could destroy the Enduring Hope in minutes. You could kill everyone aboard and face no consequences. The Conquered has ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years. We are nothing to you, a footnote, a minor inconvenience. You speak truth. This is unusual for your species. I have one more thing to acknowledge." His voice grew quieter but somehow stronger. "Human history is full of moments like this one. Moments when ordinary people had to choose between obeying unjust laws and following their conscience. Sometimes they chose obedience. They turned away refugees at their borders. They sent people back to face death because the paperwork was not in order. They closed their eyes and told themselves that the law was the law and there was nothing they could do." She paused. The bridge crew watched her with wide eyes. "Those moments haunt us," she continued. "We teach our children about them. We build memorials to the people who died because someone followed orders instead of doing what was right. We swore that we would never let it happen again. And we broke that promise over and over because it was always easier to obey than to resist." Showed no reaction. "Captain Watts, I fail to see the relevance of your species' internal moral struggles. The law is clear. They are fugitives. You will surrender them." "No." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. "I will not surrender them," said. "I will not hand over children to be executed because your government wants to send a message. I will not participate in murder and call it law." For the first time, something flickered in those black eyes. It might have been surprise, it might have been anger. "You understand what you are saying. You are defying the Galactic Conquered. You are placing your entire species at risk." "I understand. Your government has not authorized this action. Your military cannot protect you. You are alone." "I know." Leaned forward slightly. "Then explain to me, Captain, why you would throw away everything for 43 beings you met 3 days ago. What possible reason could justify such foolishness?" Met his gaze without flinching. "Because if I hand them over, I have to live with that for the rest of my life. I have to look in the mirror and see someone who let children die because it was convenient. I have to explain to my daughter that I chose safety over justice. And I cannot do that. I will not do that." "You would die for this principle." "If I have to." "You would let your crew die, your colonists, the 2,000 families who trusted you to protect them." Felt the weight of those words pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of Danny and his wife and children. She thought of all the people sleeping in the colonist section, dreaming of their new home on New Haven. She thought of everything she was risking with these words. "I hope it does not come to that," she said. "But I believe that some things are worth more than survival. I believe that how we live matters more than how long we live. And I believe that if we abandon everything that makes us human just to stay alive, then we have already lost." Stared at her for a long moment. Then he straightened and turned to someone off screen. "Power weapons to full. Prepare targeting solutions for the human vessel." Alarms began screaming across the bridge of the Enduring Hope. Red lights flashed. Pete Grant shouted that the warships were locking on. Cole grabbed his arm. "Captain, please, there has to be another way." But just stood there, watching the screen, waiting for the end. And then something impossible happened. A new signal cut through all channels. It overrode the conquered frequencies. It silenced every alarm and every warning. A new face appeared on the screen, pushing to a small window in the corner. The face belonged to there were a species known throughout the galaxy for one thing and one thing only: trade. They controlled 60% of all commerce in known space. They owned the largest network of trading stations. They had survived 12,000 years by never taking sides in any conflict, never making enemies, never getting involved in politics. The on-screen was female, with green-gold scales and calculating eyes. She identified herself as Station Administrator of Prime, the neutral trading station that the Enduring Hope had been heading toward when all of this began. "High Adjudicator," she said calmly. "I am invoking the Merchant Neutrality Compact, Section 12. Prime is hereby declared a sanctuary zone. Any vessel that discharges weapons within sensor range of this station will be permanently banned from all trade networks. No exceptions. No appeals." His face contorted with something that looked almost like shock. "Administrator, this matter does not concern the. You have no reason to interfere." "I have every reason," replied. "I have been watching this situation develop. I have heard what Captain Watts said, and I have made my decision. You would risk your trade relationships with the Conquered for one human ship." Smiled, showing rows of small, sharp teeth. "High Adjudicator that have survived for thousands of years by understanding one simple truth. Power comes and goes. Empires rise and fall. But integrity, once lost, never returns. Today, I choose to stand with integrity." The weapons on the conquered warships remained powered but did not fire. Looked at the human captain, then at the administrator, and for the first time in his long career, he did not know what to do next. The standoff held for exactly 17 minutes. Captain Watts counted every second of it, watching the tactical display where 12 conquered warships remained frozen with their weapons locked on her vessel. One order from would end everything. But that order did not come. Administrator's intervention had changed the calculation. The Conquered was powerful, but power had limits. If they fired on the Enduring Hope now, they would lose access to 60% of galactic trade. Supply lines would collapse. Economies would crumble. The cost would be measured in centuries of damage, all for the sake of 43 refugees that most beings had never heard of. Was not a diplomat. He was an enforcer, trained to apply the law without question or hesitation. But even he understood that there were some battles that could not be won through force alone. "Administrator," he said through gritted teeth, "this is an internal conquered matter. Your interference is unprecedented." "That is correct," replied calmly. "It is unprecedented, but so is what Captain Watts just did. Perhaps this is a day for new precedents." On the bridge of the Enduring Hope, Lieutenant Park suddenly looked up from his console. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "Captain, I am receiving additional signals. Multiple ships are responding to Administrator's broadcast." "Put it on screen." The tactical display updated. A science vessel had broken from its patrol route and was moving to intercept the conquered fleet. They were a peaceful species, known for their research and their reluctance to get involved in conflicts. But their captain was now broadcasting a message of support for the enduring hope. A pilgrim ship, small and unarmed, had positioned itself directly in front of one of the conquered warships. There were religious wanderers who traveled the galaxy seeking spiritual enlightenment. They had no military, no political influence, and no reason to risk themselves. But there they were, forming a living shield between the hunters and their prey. More signals came in. A mining consortium from the outer territories announced that they would suspend all mineral shipments to conquered worlds if the enduring hope was attacked. A communications guild declared that they would broadcast everything that happened here to every corner of the galaxy, ensuring that whatever did would be witnessed by trillions of beings. Cole shook her head in amazement. This is impossible. These species never get involved in anything. They stay neutral. They protect themselves. Apparently not today, said quietly. His image flickered as he received report after report. Each new signal was another crack in his authority. He had come here expecting a simple extraction, a routine enforcement action against a minor species. Instead, he was facing something he had never encountered before, a coalition of the weak standing together against the strong. He turned back to the screen. Captain Watts, you seem to have inspired some foolish beings to take foolish actions, but understand this. The conquered has crushed resistance before. We have waited out blockades. We have outlasted protests. In the end, the law always wins. Maybe said, but not today. You think this changes anything? These ships will scatter when we show our resolve. They will remember their prophets soon enough. And you will be alone again, facing the same choice. Then we will face it again, and however many times it takes. Administrator spoke up. High Adjudicator, I think you should know why I made my decision. You asked why I would risk my trade relationships for one human ship. Let me tell you a story. Said nothing, but he did not cut the channel. 40 years ago, continued, humanity first arrived at Prime. They were new to space travel. They had nothing to offer us. No valuable goods, no advanced technology, no strategic importance. By all rational measures, we should have ignored them completely. I failed to see the relevance. Their trade representative was a young man named Samuel Hayes. He came to my office to negotiate a basic commerce agreement. It should have taken an hour, but before we began, he did something strange. He asked me my name. Paused and something shifted in her expression. In 40 years of business, no other species had ever asked me that. To the dozen other powers who passed through my station, I was simply administrator, a function, a title, but this human wanted to know who I was. He brought a gift too, not a bribe, not a trade sample, just a small plant from Earth, something called a flower, because he thought my office looked too empty. Remembered Samuel Hayes. He had retired from the diplomatic corps 15 years ago. He lived on a small farm now, growing those same flowers. I have done business with humans ever since, said. They frustrate me. They are emotional and irrational, and they make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. But they are the only species I have ever met who seem to genuinely care about beings other than themselves. They form bonds. They remember names. They risk their own safety to help strangers. She looked directly at. Today, I watched a human captain threaten to sacrifice herself and her entire ship rather than hand over refugees she barely knew. Not because it was smart, not because it would benefit her, but because she could not live with herself if she did the easy thing instead of the right thing. And this moved you to action. It reminded me of something I had forgotten. They built our empire on trade. We believed that neutrality was wisdom and profit was purpose. But watching Captain Watts stand there and refuse to bend, I remembered that there are some things more valuable than commerce. Some things that cannot be bought or sold. His eyes hardened. Integrity, High Adjudicator. That is what I am protecting today. Not the humans, not the integrity, Because if beings like Captain Watts disappear from this galaxy, then it will not be worth living in anymore. The bridge of the enduring hope was silent, felt tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she forced them back. This was not the time for emotion. The danger was not over yet. Stood perfectly still for a long moment. His black eyes moved from to the tactical display, showing all the ships that had to this impossible cause. Finally he spoke. This matter will be referred to the High Assembly. The conquered does not forget and we do not forgive, but we also do not make decisions in haste. He paused. Captain Watts, you have won nothing here today. You have only delayed the inevitable. Then I will take the delay, said, and I will use it. The conquered warships began to power down their weapons. One by one, they broke formation and turned away from Prime. But knew that was right about one thing. This was not over. It was only beginning. 3 weeks after the standoff at Prime, Captain Watts stood before the Galactic Conquered High Assembly on Prime. She was the first human to ever address this body directly. Behind her, projected on screens across 1,000 worlds, billions of beings watched and waited. The assembly chamber was ancient beyond imagining. Its walls had seen the rise and fall of empires. Its seats held representatives from 47 species, each one older and more powerful than humanity. The air itself seemed heavy with history and judgment. High Speaker Wen presided over the proceedings. She was one of the founding species of the conquered. Her body was frail with age, her skin like cracked parchment stretched over thin bones, but her eyes burned with an intelligence that had witnessed 12,000 years of galactic history. Captain Watts of the human vessel Enduring Hope, Wen announced. You stand before this assembly charged with 3 violations: defiance of lawful authority, harboring fugitives from conquered justice, incitement of civil disruption among member species. How do you answer these charges? Stood alone at the speaker's platform. She had no legal counsel. She had no allies in the chamber. Earth Command had sent a message of support but made clear that humanity could not officially endorse her actions. Whatever happened here, she would face it on her own. High Speaker, she said, I do not deny the charges. A murmur rippled through the assembly. They had expected arguments. They had expected excuses. Direct acknowledgement was unusual. I took 43 refugees aboard my ship, continued. I refused to surrender them to the conquered fleet. I inspired other vessels to shield the Enduring Hope from attack. All of these things are true. Wen leaned forward slightly. Then you admit your guilt. I admit my actions. Whether they constitute guilt depends on what we mean by law. The law is clear, Captain. It has been clear for 12,000 years. Took a slow breath. She had practiced this speech 100 times in her quarters. She had imagined all the ways it could go wrong. But standing here now, facing all these ancient eyes, she found that the words came easier than she expected. High Speaker, I would like to ask a question, not to delay judgment, not to make excuses, but because I genuinely want to understand. Proceed. How many species in this chamber have stories of persecution? The murmur grew louder. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I have studied the histories of the conquered member species, said. I learned that they were nearly exterminated 3,000 years ago by a species that considered them pests. I learned that they fled there because their religious beliefs were forbidden by the ruling government. I learned that they themselves were once refugees, escaping a dying sun to find a new home among the stars. Wen's ancient eyes narrowed, but she did not interrupt. Every species in this chamber has a story of survival against unjust odds. Every one of you has ancestors who lived only because someone, somewhere, chose mercy over law. Someone broke the rules. Someone took a risk. Someone decided that survival mattered more than compliance. Looked around the chamber. They refused to pay tribute taxes that would have starved their children. For that crime, the conquered declared them non-compliant and sentenced them to death. Not just the leaders who made the decision, not just the adults who enforced it. Everyone, including children who were not even born when the decision was made. She paused to let that sink in. High Speaker, I do not stand here to overthrow the conquered. Humanity is small and weak. We have no power to challenge your authority. We do not want war. We do not want chaos. We only want to be part of a galaxy where innocent beings are not executed for the crimes of their grandparents. The law exists to maintain order, Wen said. Without consequences, there can be no compliance. Without compliance, there can be no peace. I understand that, but I also understand that laws can be wrong. Laws can be cruel. Laws can serve power instead of justice. And when that happens, the only thing that changes them is ordinary beings who refuse to obey. His voice grew stronger. If obeying your law means becoming a monster, then I choose to be an outlaw. If following your rules means handing children over to be executed, then I will break those rules every single time. Not because I am brave, not because I am righteous, but because I cannot live any other way. The chamber fell silent, stood alone under the weight of all those watching eyes. Finally, Wen spoke. The assembly will now vote on the matter of Captain Watts and the refugees. The voting took several hours, was escorted to a waiting area where she sat in silence, thinking about everyone who was counting on her. Her crew, her colonists, the 43 who had trusted her with their lives, her daughter Lily watching from Earth, probably unable to sleep. When she was finally called back to the chamber, Wen announced the results. The vote was not unanimous. Several species had demanded harsh sanctions against humanity. Several others had called for Captain Watts to be imprisoned or executed as an example. But in the end, a majority had chosen a different path. The charges against the Enduring Hope were dismissed. The refugees were granted asylum on a neutral world. And for the first time in 12,000 years of conquered history, the tribute laws were scheduled for formal review by an independent committee. Could barely process the words. She had expected punishment. She had prepared herself for the worst. This felt like waking from a nightmare to find the sun rising. As she left the chamber, Wen stopped her in the corridor. The ancient moved slowly, her body bent with the weight of centuries, but her eyes were sharp and thoughtful. Captain Watts, you have made many enemies today. I know. You have also made something more dangerous. Looked at her, what is that? Wen's thin lips curved into something that might have been a smile. A precedent. For 12,000 years, the law of the conquered has been absolute. Today, you showed that it can be questioned, that it can be challenged, that it can be changed. She paused. Do you understand what that means? I think so. It means that you have started something that cannot be stopped. Other beings will remember what you did. They will wonder if they could do the same. They will begin to ask questions that have not been asked for. Wen shook her head slowly. You humans, you have been in this galaxy for such a short time, and already you are causing so much trouble. I hope it is the good kind of trouble. We shall see. 6 months later, the Enduring Hope finally reached its destination. The colony world of New Haven spread out below them, green and blue and full of promise. 2,000 colonists lined up to board the landing shuttles, eager to start their new lives. Among them were 43 refugees. They had been offered asylum on a dozen different worlds, but they had asked to stay with the humans who had saved them. They wanted to help build this new colony. They wanted to be part of whatever humanity was creating out here among the stars. Captain Watts stood at the observation window and watched the first shuttle descend toward the surface. Beside her, the elder gazed at the world below with wonder in his ancient eyes. It is beautiful, he said softly. It is home, replied, for all of us now. Placed his thin hand over hers, just as he had done in the cargo bay all those months ago. You risked everything for us. we will never forget. Smiled, that is what humans do. We take care of each other, all of us, no matter where we come from. Below them, on the surface of New Haven, the first colonists stepped onto alien soil and began to build a future. It would not be easy. There would be challenges and hardships and moments of doubt, but they would face it together, human and alike, proving that the galaxy was big enough for compassion as well as law. And somewhere, watching from across the stars, other beings remembered what had happened at Prime. They remembered a human captain who stood alone against an empire and refused to bend. They remembered that courage could be contagious and that even the oldest laws could be changed. They remembered, and they began to hope.